Good morning, everyone here on Zoom and watching on Facebook Live. Thank you for joining us today for a community forum on police reform and racial equity. My name is Sarah Henry. I'm the city's public information officer, but today I'm here in a support role as the community-led committees on police reform and racial equity present their findings and draft recommendations to you all. Then on March 16th, the community-led committees will present their revised recommendations to the City Council, and you're all welcome to watch that meeting and provide public comment. Please note that all participants have been muted. To ask a question or make a comment today, please enter it in the chat. All comments must be respectful, and I'll read them after the presentation when members of both the community-led steering committee and our 5 subcommittees are available to answer questions. Before we start, I'd like to ask all of the community members who are here this morning with us and have been working on these recommendations for so long to please introduce themselves.
I can start. We'll do steering committee first and then the 5 subcommittees. So good morning and thank you for coming. My name is Cheryl Taylor. I'm a member of the steering committee.
Jolene Wright, member of the steering committee. Good morning. Happy Valentine's Day, or day before Valentine's Day.
Christine Shulcott, I'm a member of the steering committee. Hello, everyone.
Al Mance, I'm a member of the steering committee. Good morning.
Great. And so we'll start with the unbundling services subcommittee rather.
Good morning. I'm Deborah Lewis Mendoza. I'm co-chair of the Unbundling Services Committee.
Good morning. I'm Aaron Fraser. I'm the other co-chair of the Unbundling Police Services Subcommittee.
Okay. Moving on to the Police Department Policies and Practices Subcommittee. Who's here? Okay. Going once.
Policies and procedures. I'm a member of that subcommittee.
Okay. Thanks, Al. How about Police Department Accountability and Oversight? Who
Hi, I'm Gavin. I'm one of the co-chairs of Police Accountability and Oversight.
Thank you.
I'm Aisha. I'm one of the members of Accountability and Oversight.
Awesome.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Rakowski. I'm one of the members of Accountability and Oversight.
And I'm Sean Cahill. I'm also a member of the Accountability and Oversight Subcommittee.
Great. Moving on to a review of laws that criminalize survival subcommittee. We'll give you a second. Okay. And finally, systemic and community racism. Who is here from that committee?
Hi, good morning. My name is Heather Reed. I am the chairperson of the Systemic and Community Racism Subcommittee. Thank you all for being here.
And I'm Andrea Carlis. I am a member of the Systemic and Community Racism Subcommittee.
Okay. And circling back around, did we miss any member of a subcommittee who has not introduced themselves? Please jump in.
I see Melody down there.
I'm Melody. I am co-chair of the Oversight and Review Committee. It's too early for this, but hi.
Okay. I think we got everyone, although I do think Danielle Poole may have jumped on as a member as well. Okay. Okay, I think that might be everyone, Sarah.
Okay, I actually just unmuted Danielle.
Oh.
I'm trying to.
Oh, no, I'm not a member. I just came to listen.
Okay. Okay, so we should be all set. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And I'd like to now turn things over to Cheryl Taylor and the steering committee.
Oops. Okay. I am ready. Let me share my screen. Just give me one hot second. So here, does everyone see the presentation?
Looks great.
Okay, great. So we wanted to start off, and this is a presentation we've delivered many times throughout the community. And so with a few different tweaks but mostly the same. So this might be a little bit of a repeat for some folks, but we did want to start out with quite a stark picture showing how policing in America looks different for different people, and it feels different. You know, where so on the left you see that police officers are taking selfies with the insurrectionists who stormed the Capitol last month, and on the right, you see how the U.S. Park Police pushed back protesters in the Black Lives Matter rallies, this one near the White House last summer. So very different experiences in the United States. Oops. So we're here for this second forum, and we have introduced ourselves, the Racial Equity Steering Committee, Police Reforms and Racial Equity Steering Committee members. We wanted to give you a sense of our philosophy and our approach. And the idea is we're committed to reforming, you know, sort of the ways in which policing is done in the city of Alameda. It's very important to the community, and we definitely respect APD and sort of the broader city's commitment to safety and security. But we also believe there's room for improvement here in the city that we all love. And so just to give you a little bit of an idea of how we came to be and how we were started. So we started, gosh, I wish I could do the math quickly in my head. Is that 6 months ago? August 2020. Sort of 4 members of the community were selected, myself, Jolene, Al, and Christine. And sort of in turn, we sort of selected 60 from, you know, over 250 responses or applicants. And, you know, it was quite difficult, but we feel like we got a good cohort of people, as well as folks who have sort of been engaged, not as committee members, but engaged at least in the discussion. So one thing I'd like to underscore is that many of us, with very few exceptions, are lay people who are not sort of policing professionals, public safety professionals. You know, yet I think we all bring sort of a lot of very good skills, a lot of very good intention to this work. But we're all volunteers here because we really do want to see our community transform and change. So we want to sort of talk about kind of our busy quarter so far. This is our second community forum, having had one sort of in the middle part of last month, but we've spoken to many different community or citizens boards here in town, including Civil Service Board, Transportation, the Youth Commission, Shrub, Business Association, and most recently, a few days ago, Commission on Persons with Disabilities. And so you also see sort of what we've done and are yet to do. We have a survey out, and I hope that you all complete the survey, as well as looking forward to presenting draft recommendations to council for their feedback as part of their budget considerations. So we do, as we sort of went through the introductions, we sort of backed into kind of introducing the 5 subcommittees that we have. And this is sort of an attempt not just to look at policing incidents, but sort of a broader context, you know, but definitely touch upon aspects in which policing and kind of response to, you know, community issues can be reconsidered. So the 5 committees you see are unbundling services that police currently deliver throughout different forums. Even they have mentioned that they may not be the best people to provide mental health response, just as an example. A review of police department policies and practices, accountability and oversight, which is sort of common in many cities throughout the United States, and definitely Bay Area, to have accountability and oversight separate bodies, sort of broadening that, a review of laws that criminalize survival, right? That sort of like keep people in a cycle, you know, sort of under police watch. And finally, systemic and community racism, because sort of policing has grown out of that context. So take a look at some of these links on your time later. As far as our process goes, our steering committee, you know, the 4 folks, we've met every Sunday for a couple of hours since August. And occasionally we include subcommittee chairs in these meetings, but also we've had larger committee meetings, including including the subcommittee members, to sort of like recalibrate, refocus. And we include the city staff as well. City staff has been tremendously helpful and supportive. I'd like to call out Sarah and Lisa Foster, Sarah Henry and Lisa Foster in particular, as well as Jerry Bodine. And I hope I'm not mispronouncing his name, his last name. But this is a community-led effort. I mean, none of us are getting paid for this. We are all volunteers in this effort. So I think I'm going to turn it over to Al at this point. I think this is the transition slide where we talk about some of the early subcommittee recommendations. But just to say that this really is the beginning of the discussion, and overall, we really, our intention is really to keep policing accountable. So Al, take it away and just let me know when to forward the slide. Al, are you there?
I think you're muted, Al.
Oh, there we go. Can everyone hear
There
me?
you go. Yes.
Thanks very much again, everyone, for being here. My name is Al Mance, and I am a member of the steering committee, and I also do some work with the policies and procedures subcommittee. So early subcommittee recommendations. So we've been meeting since for about the last 5 months. The subcommittees have working on this, and this is just the very beginning. Basically, residents of Alameda, people who have an interest in Alameda, coming together to try to figure out what the issues are that need to be addressed. And one of the questions that's come up a few times is, are we creating a problem just based on assumptions about the situation in the United States rather than being specific to Alameda? And I think the answer to that question is no. We all live in Alameda. We have friends who either live or work or visit Alameda. And a lot of what we're doing, these are not problems that we've just imagined. These are problems that we've either experienced or that we've heard about from our friends, and based on our own life experiences, as well as the numbers and information that we were able to get from the police. Alameda is a city of roughly 85,000 people. So, we don't have many of the problems that larger cities have, but we do have issues, and there's always places for improvement. So when we are talking about our recommendations, we're looking at places that things can be improved. And, most importantly, the relationship between the police and the community. As the slide says, we must all remain vigilant in keeping policing accountable to all of those who live, work, play, and pray in Alameda. So we're talking about residents as well as the community who might come in and visit. The list we're about to go over is not at all of the recommendations. It's just something we've picked as representative of the recommendations. I believe we have about 20 recommendations total from the 5 committees. And I know Ms. Henry put a link in the chat so that you can go to the city website where all of those recommendations can be seen and read. And I urge you to do so if you haven't already, because it's far more comprehensive. Next slide, please. So creating a police accountability department and citizens police oversight committee is something that is becoming more and more common in the United States, and we've suggested Alameda do the same thing. And this is making the suggestion, making this recommendation is just the beginning of the process. A significant amount of work remains in determining exactly what that looks like. But one of the issues that we had in gathering information about APD and assessing what its needs were is that while the city does keep the statistics as required by the state, there is more information that could be made available. In one of our discussions with the chief and the 2 captains, the captain had mentioned the idea of hiring a crime analyst and using software that is available, but that Alameda does not currently have, which allows us to collect additional statistics that would help us to determine where issues are, where there's room for improvement, and also where APD does its best work. And this would be something that would be very useful for the task force to ensure that to document police civilian interactions, which is what we're basically looking to do. we're also, we've got the Laws of Criminalized Survival Subcommittee, and that committee, one of the things that they do is one of their focuses is determining where fines and fee revenue are curious to people who are might be below the poverty line, or people who are homeless, or who are visiting Alameda. And so we're asking that the city develop that. One of the tasks of this oversight committee is to determine how those fines and fees affect members of the community and also people visiting Alameda. Next slide, please.
Oh, I'm sorry, Al, did you want to do the ask people the question after each one of these? Or you've muted your.
Yes, we could.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'm just going to launch the polling for this one, and basically it's just asking folks to vote right now. Do you think the subcommittee's recommendation number 1 to create the Police Accountability Department and Citizens Police Oversight Committee tasked with jointly holding APD accountable for adherence to good police practices? Do you strongly agree, somewhat agree? Are you neutral? Do you somewhat disagree that this is on the right track, or do you strongly disagree this is on the right track? So if you'll register your vote now, we're just keeping track of this at all of our meetings so that it can be reported back out to folks. And so if you'll vote now, and if you're watching us on Facebook, you can't vote, so you could join us on Zoom if you'd like to vote. We'll give it 4 more seconds. Okay, and then I'll end the polling. And here are the results for those watching. It looks like 67% strongly agree it's on the right track, 25% neutral, and 8% strongly disagree that it's on the right track. So I'll stop sharing, and I can pull this up for each recommendation.
And so, of course, you can also feel free to put questions and comments in the, so if you want to comment further on this, you're welcome to do that in the chat. We're very open to hearing any comments that anyone has. Okay, so this next slide indicates that a police oversight board needs to be written into the city charter, and that's simply due to the fact that part of our process was to look at what's been done in other cities and how successful it's been, and of course, an oversight committee is something that is not desired by all, and so in order to protect them and make sure that they have the anonymity that they need, it would be best to write them into the city charter. Otherwise, they can. Their strength can be significantly undercut, as the slide indicates. So, Sarah, is there a question on this one?
No, I don't see any questions. Oh, no, I don't see any questions.
Is there a poll on this
Oh,
slide?
yes, of course. Yes, let me launch it. Sorry, my apologies.
Oh, sure. No problem. I wasn't clear.
Okay, here's the poll for recommendation 2. A police oversight board needs to be written into the city charter. Do you think the subcommittee's recommendation is generally on the right track? Yes, strongly agree. Yes, somewhat agree. Neutral. No, somewhat disagree, or no, strongly disagree. Go ahead and lock in your votes. And I'll give it 4 more seconds. Okay, we have about not a big, we have a pretty small crowd here on Zoom, so we have about 14 people voting. And the results, 50% strongly agree that it's on the right track, 29% somewhat agree, 7% neutral, no one somewhat disagrees, but 14% strongly disagrees. And I will stop sharing now.
So in addition to, or as a subgroup of the oversight committee, a policies and procedures review board could be formed. And the reason that we've talked about that is because of the fact that, a lot of small departments, and Alameda included, rely on larger organizations it can be quite a task, as you're probably aware, in addition to state law changing, whenever a court of appeals or the California Supreme Court or the U.S. Supreme Court publishes a decision on policing, it requires police departments to change what their policies are to conform to that whatever that case law is, because it is new law. And it can be very difficult, particularly for a smaller police department like we have in Alameda. So they require, so most of those police agencies rely on larger organizations to help them to keep their policies and procedures up to date. And of course, necessarily, because those are larger organizations that provide advice that is statewide or sometimes nationwide. It's sort of it's more of a one size fits all. Then and what we're hoping to do, what part of this process, because we're fortunate to live in a smaller community, and it is a community that where we can have conversations where the mayor is easily accessible, the city council is easily accessible, the police chief is easily accessible. So we have the ability to include to have a police force whose values mirror those of the community. And this is one way in which we can help to make sure that that's the case. So the idea of a policies and procedures review board is that when policy and procedures changes are being made, this review board can review them as well and give an advisory opinion. The mayor and the city council could potentially appoint those folks. They can also have perhaps the city manager, the police chief, or the city attorney or their designees as members of this committee. And we're hoping that we could do that and use a cross section of the city so that we get as many different opinions as possible. One of the voices that's seldom heard, in these discussions is the voice of the police. And this doesn't mean people who are, convicted or guilty of crimes. It means or people who are part of the populations that are frequently policed, or the subject. If you look at the statistics that are available, a disproportionate number of the stops that are made by most police departments, this isn't just Alameda, are people of color. So we want to make sure that their voices are heard in this process. The idea is that the board would advise the city manager on these policies and procedures changes before the changes are adopted and implemented. And we can do the poll now.
Yep. So again, we're asking, do you think subcommittee recommendation 3, a policy and procedures review board to be formed, overseen by the newly formed police accountability department, reporting to the Citizens Police Oversight Committee, could be formed? Do you think it's on the right track? Enter if you strongly agree, somewhat agree, neutral, somewhat disagree, or strongly disagree. And give you 2 more seconds. And I have 14 votes. I'll end the polling and share the results. 64% strongly agree, 14% somewhat agree, 14% neutral, 7% strongly disagree. I will stop sharing.
And I just want to say quickly that particularly the opinions of folks who disagree are extremely important, and they are welcome. These are draft recommendations. We are hoping to get and dependent on public input in order to make these final recommendations. And so I'm hoping that in addition to just answering the polling questions, you'll put comments in or ask questions or give us comments after the presentation is over. I welcome that, and it will be received as long as it's brought in with positive energy, it will be received with positivity, and we can have a real deep discussion. I'm looking forward to that. And those of you who are neutral, please ask the questions that you need to determine whether or not this is something that you think or these are good ideas, are good policy recommendations. Okay, can we go to the next slide, please? So mental health and de-escalation training. As part of this process, fairly early on in the process, we had a series of meetings with Chief Finn and with the Alameda's 2 police captains, as well as other members of APD to address certain specific questions. And one of the things we talked about was what training takes place. The police academy is about 6.5 months, and then after a new officer graduates from the police academy, they spend 5.5 months with a field training officer. And one of the questions that we asked was, what sort of training is repeated and where certain training was received. And there are some things that are done only at the academy. There are some things that are addressed in field training, and then there are other things that are done on a regular basis. Firearms training, things like that these are what they call perishable skills, and so they are the officers are required to requalify on those on I believe it's on an annual basis, because obviously they're skills you don't use very often, but when you need them, and you need to be proficient in them, because they're dangerous and they're vital. We want to put a similar emphasis on mental health and de-escalation training, because these are also, in our opinion, perishable skills, and they are skills that are used far more frequently than weapon skills and other sorts of skills that are traditionally thought of as being perishable. So currently, because I think it's SB 230 or 203, forgive me, but the state is requiring that new training be given to all police officers on crisis intervention, but it's a one-time thing, and all Alameda police officers are going through that currently. They're all cycling through. We're asking that this be done on an annual or semi-annual basis, and with the idea being that serves two goals. The first being, of course, that officers are just better equipped to deal with these sorts of situations that they encounter frequently. The second is that it sort of puts an emphasis on the importance of this, so that when officers go into these situations, the first thought that they have is to apply their training. Someone just asked the question of who would do the training, and that's something. This is a preliminary recommendation, so that's something that remains to be determined. There are a number of organizations that provide this sort of training. Most of the organizations provided to police officers are relatively new. These programs are being developed now. There are a number of programs that deal with these are skills that are possessed by members of the community who aren't in law enforcement, how to deal with mental health crises, and just de-escalation of conflict situations is a skill that is widely taught. One thing that was on an earlier slide that I didn't mention was the fact that these are often overlapping. A lot of these recommendations are overlapping, and if you look at the actual recommendations, you can see that. One of the unbundling suggestions is that we rely more on mental health experts to deal with APD calls or calls to APD that concern mental health situations, and so these things can work in combination. So when the officers are required to respond, they have additional mental health and de-escalation training. But the suggestion is that many times it may be more appropriate to have mental health experts respond to these situations, because mental health crises often, if you don't have the training, then these situations can sometimes look more threatening than they are. Or they certainly can be unnerving, and so the more training one has in these situations, the more likely one will be able to handle them without resorting to the use of force. Next slide, please.
I'll pull up the.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No problem. Okay, go ahead. Here's the poll asking if the subcommittee's recommendation number 4, requiring mental health and de-escalation training on an annual or semi-annual basis, is it on the right track? Go ahead and please lock in your vote, and we'll do 3 more seconds. And I got that 16 responses this time. Okay, go ahead and end and share. 69% strongly agree it's on the right track, 19% somewhat agree, and 13% somewhat disagree that this is on the right track. So I'll stop sharing and we can move to the next slide.
So I spoke a little bit earlier about the crime analyst position, and this is something. So I won't spend a lot of time on this, but crime analysts can make the police department more effective, just in the way how they would respond to crime. How they know where the problem areas are, how they can make just internal improvements, and also how they can respond as quickly as possible to requests for public information. And to the extent this information is available to the public, it can be very helpful to the police departments to show that they are effective. So it seems like a good idea all around, and it is something that was brought up by law enforcement in our series of meetings with them. So should we put up the poll?
Sure. And so here's the poll on recommendation 5 to add a full-time crime analyst position, expand the statistical data expertise of the Alameda Police Department. Is this recommendation 5 generally on the right track? Give it 4 more seconds to register your votes. And I'm going to end polling. I had 16 people take that poll, and 50% strongly agree, 25% somewhat agree, 6% neutral, and 19% somewhat disagree. So I will stop sharing now.
And I just want to make clear before we move on to the next slide that that was a suggestion that came from law enforcement. In any case, next slide. So hire a police chief committed to reform, and in particular to rooting out bias and use of excessive force in policing, and committed to creating a department characterized in its policies and culture by diversity, equity, and inclusion, with special attention to be paid to candidates traditionally underrepresented in police chief positions. The hiring process is currently going forward. And this is something that we've made clear to the hiring committee. I believe the committee will be looking to the public to help them to interview candidates. And so this is something that we will, to the extent that we are involved, we will be bringing this goal to the process. I think it speaks for itself. So we can put the poll up.
Great. Here's the poll for recommendation 6, hire a police chief committed to reform and in particular to rooting out bias, use of excessive force in policing, committed to creating a department characterized in its policies and culture by diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we'll give it 4 more seconds. All right. And I'm going to end polling. I had 15 people take that poll, and 67% strongly agree, 20% somewhat agree, 7% are neutral, and 7% somewhat disagree. So I'm going to stop sharing. All right, we can move to the next slide.
All right. So advance a dynamic and robust annual assessment of community needs conducted by individuals outside of APD using service call data, police dispatch, and outcome data, surveys of Alameda residents and visitors, and other community outreach modes. And so, yeah, there are recommendations, multiple recommendations that sort of address this issue. And so this slide just sort of generally, it's sort of a blanket representation of those. Police, it's been said that the beat cop is the most powerful person in law enforcement, more powerful than any judge or any district attorney, because of the fact that they have that public interaction, and because they make decisions in the moment of who to arrest, when to use force, what offenses to charge. And of course, those are recommendations. That final decision is made by the DA, but they rely on the reports that are submitted by police officers. And because police officers within our society have such a large amount of credibility. So it is very important that the goals of police and the values of police match those of the community that they are policing. So how do you determine that? Well, people go to city council meetings and they make their thoughts known. That tends to be a select group of people, just because of the folks who have the knowledge, who have the courage, and who have the time to do things like that. So one of the things that we want to do in order to get the opinions of the largest number of the members of our community as possible is to have these annual assessments. Use the call data to determine, are these tasks that the police should be doing? Are these tasks that we want someone else doing? Look at the police dispatch to see, what sort of calls are received, what the outcomes of when these calls are made, what are the outcomes? How often is a call to 911 resulting in an arrest? What sort of arrest? What sort of charges? And just talking to folks and how they are feeling about the manner in which policing is being done. Do they feel respected by the police? Do they feel cared for by the police? Are they happy with the police response? And I think that if we do that, it will help to improve policing. Feedback is always a positive thing. Even if it is delivered somewhat harshly, it always provides a means of improvement, and so that's what the idea is here. Should we put up the poll?
Yep. Here's the poll for recommendation 7. Do you think this recommendation 7, the subcommittee's recommendation, is on the right track to advance a dynamic and robust annual assessment of community needs conducted by individuals that are outside of APD using service call data, police dispatch and outcome data, surveys of Alameda residents and visitors, and other outreach modes? Go ahead and register your vote now, and I'll go ahead in 2 seconds. We will end polling. We had 16 people take this poll, and 44% strongly agree, 44% somewhat agree, and 13% somewhat disagree. So I'll stop sharing and we'll go to the next slide.
So this next one, enhance existing citizen feedback mechanisms to add an anti-racism reporting feedback tool for residents to report instances of prejudice, abuse of power, and racism that they witness. There is currently a means of making a complaint to the police department, but it can be complex, and it requires you to walk into the police department to get the form to make the complaint, and to then give that complaint form to the police department. This can be a very intimidating process. I've heard from individuals that it is an intimidating process, not because of any attempt to intimidate by the police department, but just by virtue of the fact of the process that is required. Having another means of reporting these incidences, prejudice, abuse, and I also want to add that this would also concern folks who are dealing with various disabilities or different abilities as well, and folks who have mental health issues or who observe these, concerning incidences involving folks who are dealing with those issues, because this would give, once again, the idea behind all of this is to give the police department more tools to determine how it is that they should respond to these sorts of things, and also, to the extent necessary, to allow the city council, the city manager, and the mayor to give them knowledge of what's needed to be done, what changes need to be made with regard to policies and procedures, and just accountability in general. The slide goes into some further detail about how this would be done, but what I would do is I'd refer you to the actual the link below that has the policies and procedures, and to take a look at it for a more in-depth dive. I just saw a question come up. What is racist can be very personal. Will these be graded? At this point, we have not developed a system for that. These are just preliminary recommendations. So I think that is an excellent question. That is something that should definitely be considered, but that's a very difficult thing to do. It's a subjective thing. So I think it's difficult to grade them. In my mind, and I'm speaking only for myself now, it seems to me that the just collecting these incidences, one of the things that my committee talks about a lot is the idea of procedural justice, and that's that a community policing is most effective when the community believes that police have the moral authority to police them. And so I think there is a huge amount of power in being listened to. I think that there is a huge amount of educational power in hearing these stories and having a police. Sometimes police officers, I think, in dealing with the public, do things because they don't understand what the effect is on an individual. And so I think sharing stories like this can be very helpful. What about anti-religious, anti-gender, etc.? Yes, absolutely. This is just a slide. This isn't the actual policy recommendation, but I think that all of those categories should be and will be included. But I think that the storytelling is very important. Policing is a very human thing. And if you look at how a first-year officer responds versus an officer who's been around for 20 years, those responses are often very different because of the experience that 20-year officer has gotten over time. And I think that if we share stories, then it's a way to increase the amount of experience at a faster rate than you could just through working in policing, just going out on a shift. Time for the poll, I guess.
This is the last poll, last recommendation. Number 8, to enhance existing citizen feedback mechanisms and add an anti-racism reporting feedback tool for residents to report instances of prejudice, abuse of power, and the racism that they witness. So go ahead and lock in whether or not you think the subcommittee's recommendation number 8 here is on the right track. And we'll give it 3 more seconds. And I will end. I got 15 votes that time, and 53% strongly agree, 33% somewhat agree, 7% somewhat disagree, and 7% strongly disagree. And I will, oh, I didn't share. Sorry, they're there, right there on the screen. And I'll stop sharing now.
And so once again, I see, there tends to be one person who strongly disagrees. And I think that if you put comments in the chat, you can do it anonymously, or if you change your name, then it doesn't have to come back to you or be identifiable to you. And your feedback is super important. And we need to know the reasons. If we know the reasons why you disagree, then we can respond or we can make changes based on your concerns. So next step, we've had, as you saw at the beginning, we've had a number of meetings, and we have a few more. The public forum number 2 is going on today. We're meeting with the Kiwanis Club and the Open Government Commission on March 1st. There are surveys that are currently out, and we're hoping that you respond to the survey. And in addition to responding, please give it to your friends. And you don't have to be a resident of Alameda to complete the survey. As you said, as we said earlier, the categories that we include are work, live, play. Anybody who comes to Alameda, particularly on a regular basis, who may have had experiences with APD, these are the folks that we're looking for to answer these questions. And on March 16th, we'll present the draft council recommendations to the city council, and the initial work will be concluded in March. And so, as I said, this is the initial work. These are just the initial recommendations. The city council has to determine what recommendations they will prioritize. They will have to determine, what recommendations they accept, and then the policy, actually making policy based on these recommendations, is something that will begin after this process is over. And there will be opportunities for further public involvement. We will need new folks to take on this work. So if you've had a problem with the process, you will have a chance to get involved. And with that, I think we're ready to open things up to questions. Is there another slide, or is that the last one? Yep, so apdreforms@gmail.com. You can send any questions there, and we will respond to you. And not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. So the group of people that we have here, and particularly the 4 of us on the steering committee, we are wanting to do the best job that we can. We are committed to this work, and we think that it is vitally important to hear all opinions so that we can have a debate, so that we can educate ourselves, and so that we can educate others. So I'm really hoping that those of you, not just the folks who agree, but the folks who disagree or don't understand, ask as many questions, make as many comments as possible. And I'd like to thank you very much for your time and open it up to questions.
Great, thank you. And while the presentation was going on, there were a few questions that came in through the chat, so we can go through those first. And then if folks have additional questions, of course, please continue to enter them into the chat, and we'll get to them all. We have a hard stop at 11:30 today, but we should be able to get through everything by then. And I did post links into the chat for the recommendations to read the full recommendations, and also the survey. So folks should definitely check those out. The first question came in during the slide about the Police Oversight Board, asking how much authority that board would have.
I can take a stab at that one. I think that it is to be determined. Just looking, we sort of did an informal survey of different oversight boards and committees and commissions, throughout the country, and many of them, one power that is important is the ability to conduct investigations and to access police records to conduct those investigations, and that was something that was not universal, but was frequently seen. In matter of fact, for example, the Austin, Texas Oversight Board, their rights and their ability to conduct investigations is actually written into the agreement between the police union and the city. Oftentimes, the power that they had was simply advisory. They would either advise the chief or they would advise the city manager or the city council, depending on who it is who had the ability to either to either discipline or determine whether or not officers should be terminated. So that's something that we'll have to look into that further and find out what's right for Alameda.
Great. Next question that came up was during the training slide, and they asked, what are the actual trainings that are recommended for members of the police department regarding racism?
Currently?
They didn't say. I think currently, and then maybe what's proposed.
You know, I don't recall off the top of my head. Anyone else who does is welcome to answer this question. We did have this discussion. For those of you who aren't aware, we had a series of 3 meetings with the leadership at APD where we addressed a lot of these questions. I believe there is anti-bias training that goes on, but a lot of the training that the officers receive on issues such as mental illness and dispute resolution is one-time training. I know that every 2 years there is a training that's given. I don't recall the technical term. I apologize. I don't have it off the top of my head, but there was a training that's gone on the language, sort of the language that's used to de-escalate and control. That training takes place every 2 years for APD officers.
Is it the crisis intervention training? I know
No, the crisis intervention training, that is a one-time thing that's going on right now. But this is
there's an anti-bias training maybe.
No, it's sorry. I'm having a senior moment. I can't remember the name of it, but it's a training, and what it has to do with helping officers to deal with and diffuse situations. It's not quite it's not the crisis intervention training. It is a relatively short training, but it is biannual.
Okay, got it. The next person put a comment in, and they said that this was in response to one of your questions. They said they're mainly voting neutral because it's hard to gauge their opinion until they see the full set of the recommendations and learn more about them. But they added that they were thankful for this. And the next question, I'm not sure that you can answer this, but somebody asked, what would be the cost of the trainings in terms of paying for the program and overtime for officers?
Go ahead. Sorry, go for it, Al. If you had a figure, go for it. I was going to give a somewhat different answer.
I don't. Yeah, no. This was one of the things that when we did meet with the police, we talked about budget and accounting. That was the subject of one of the meetings that we had. But we don't know the specific costs of these things. That's just something that was not in our wheelhouse. And it's something that at first we did want to take on. But it's simply, our idea, our responsibility was to make the recommendations. And then one of the things that we did ask is that, this is something that's often done. The city of, Washington, D.C. hired an organization out of Oakland to help them with this process. And so they formed a committee of 20 citizens, and they're going through conducting this process. So one of the things that, we're a much smaller city, obviously, than Washington, D.C., and we've been doing this on a volunteer basis. We've done a lot of work to educate ourselves, but there are certain matters that are just beyond our, it's beyond our scope, and it's beyond our knowledge. And so I think that one of the next steps is to determine what the costs of these would be, and to craft them or adjust them in such a way that it is something that the city of Alameda can afford to do.
Yes, and to add to that, I was going to say, just as Al said, we don't know the cost, but if you think of it in reverse, what is the cost of a lawsuit if there's issues because we're not addressing this? So that's another way to look at it is, yes, it might, there is going to be a cost associated with this, but what is the cost that is associated with not doing this?
And I'd like to add too, I don't work for the city of Alameda. I do work for local government in a law enforcement organization, and there are funds for training, federal and state grants available for sworn officer training. So to sort of piggyback on Christine's comment, there's definitely a cost benefit to not doing the training, and so I think it's a values discussion, if anything.
Great. The next question is another budget question. They're asking if the crime analyst position would be paid for out of the APD budget or the general fund.
So again, I am not a city employee. I am a budget finance professional, and that's not a good distinction, because most of the police's budget, from my understanding, is from the general fund, right?
That's
So
correct.
the general fund, as many of you know, is sourced mostly from property taxes that we pay as homeowners and commercial property owners pay, as well as sales tax that everyone pays when they buy a stick of gum. And so it's, again, budgets are value documents, right? And so this is something we value as a community, and that, the police are even asking for, it seems like, we should sort of make some room for that in the budget.
Great. The next, there's only 2 more questions that I've gotten. So if folks have any additional questions, please go ahead and enter them into the chat. But the next question is asking, will the committees be recommending that community oversight board members be paid for their time and work?
That's a great question. And Cheryl, you can, after I share mine, definitely share your thoughts. I think that is a great question, but I think it needs to be looked at in a little more holistic way if we are looking at all of the committees that the city operates. So for example, I'm the president of Shrub. We're not paid for our time. So I think it really needs to be looked at in a larger way of, is this, would this committee or board be have different levels of responsibility that give it the distinction of being paid work that other commissions and boards do not have? Or are we looking at this as an overall, that if you are volunteering your time to be on these boards and commissions with the city, that we value paying for that? So that's my opinion as somebody who sits on another board. But it is important work, and I do think that if we, as Cheryl said, if we value this, then we might want to consider how we're supporting the people that are doing this work.
And I'll just, before Heather jumps in, I will agree with Christine that it really should be sort of an equity issue across all of the citizens' boards. However, I think that this work shows that at least this this discipline should be staffed within the city of Alameda, right? So there should be a staff people who do this work versus, people who are working other jobs, kind of cobbling together doing this work. But I would agree with Christine.
And yeah, just to echo what our wonderful steering committee members have already said, personally, again, only speaking for myself, I have a huge issue with the inequity of volunteer work, especially the way that this city, and I'm sure other organizations, kind of rely on the free labor of Black and brown folks. And none of us have been paid. This work has been incredibly arduous and rewarding, but when it comes to how a city values its people and its institutions, it is my personal belief that we should be paying our city council members, our mayor, etc. Even though that's a huger conversation, I think that in this within this scope, as far as budget is concerned, we really have to refocus and kind of put our money in the direction of where our values lie. So if we really do want something to come from this 6+ months of work, free work by the community members, it would really behoove folks in charge of the budget to take a real look at how they can fund this work. Because for those of us who've been watching these budget discussions happen for years, the cities fund what they care about. And the community cares about this. And I really hope that whomever's in charge finds it within themselves to throw some money behind these things in a real valuable way. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. And Heather, I'm going to piggyback on that. Cheryl, would you mind bringing up the slide that we had discussed? I know that there's different questions about costs, and we've all heard the slogan, whether you like it or not, defund the police. And so to that end, we can just briefly discuss, it was a slide that we were, thank you, Cheryl, that I think lends itself appropriately to this discussion perhaps, which is, you know, if you value the work and you value wanting to improve policing, you know, there are funds there, right? So I'm not a big fan of the term defunding, but what defunding typically tends to mean is reallocating, right? Really assessing where we are with the budget that the police department has, and really looking at the calls that come in, the requests for police service based on what they're actually trained to do versus what people just call them for and use their time for, that could be completely taken out of the police department's purview, because it's really not their job to be managing some of the things that they get called for. I think up to 50% of APD calls last year were for things that were non-police related. So if you really look at the police budget and the things that can be taken out of their departments and funded from money that they are currently receiving because they are dealing with things that are not really their jobs, then you can really look at, you know, does this oversight board that we're talking about, you know, can we support, you know, paying for their time and work? Can these funds go to, you know, homeless services, mental health services, other aspects that we are dumping on the police at this point, but really can be moved outside of the department. So thank you for the slide, Cheryl, and thank you for giving me a moment to speak.
I wanted to add something that to that as a member of the Accountability and Oversight Subcommittee. One of the things that we thought was really important was that every demographic in the community have representation, and a significant number of people would be unable to participate if they had to give up their third job in order to do the work that would be involved. Just, you know, even with administrative help, there would be a significant amount of work involved. And, you know, there are people who could not participate, and we really feel strongly that they should have a voice, especially because they are often over-policed.
Thank you for that. We just have one last question. And again, I don't know if this is one that that the steering committee can answer, if this is more a staff question, but somebody's asked if any of these recommendations will have to go into the charter.
Well, I think there was one at least that we that Al reviewed, and that was sort of chartering, I want to say, a police accountability board or citizens. Police oversight board, right? Al, do you want to?
Maybe Gavin or Melody could jump on that one.
Sure, if you'd like me to. So essentially what it would take to establish a police accountability board and make sure that they're unable to be tampered with by kind of the average machinations of politics is putting that in the city charter, just because that way it would be a little bit more free from factions and the kind of temperature of the day. So I can't really elaborate much more than that, but I think that it's really necessary for an independent board to be written in the city charter, just so that it is unable to be affected in such a severe way by just people who may be more against it than for it.
I think one of the main reasons to have it in the charter is that so that it remains relevant and important. If it's not a part of the city charter in other areas, we've seen that they start it, it looks like it's going to be a good system, and it just kind of fizzles away into we don't know where, and they don't have any power, and they can't get any work done in their city. So by putting it in the charter, it makes it relevant, it keeps it active, and gives the committee enough power to get some work and make some changes.
Somebody from the public commented that council members tend to be ideologues who are paid by the power of their titles. Local volunteers are paid by the satisfaction of their accomplishments. And then they also noted that if it's in the charter, it would require a public vote.
I think that's important to us to have the public vote to make sure that all of Alameda, or the majority of Alameda is on the same page, and that we're going forward together as a town, as a community, not just a single entity.
Heather, did you have something on that?
I was just hoping that if the person who asked the question could clarify the first part. I do hear the objection about it being something we have to vote on, and those of us who've been involved in charter amendments in the last few years know the process that will ensue. I do have a question about the paying. I need the clarification on the beginning of the question.
There were two different questions. So the paying one was separate by two different people. So the person asked, will the committees be recommending that the community oversight board members be paid for their time and work? Maybe that's going forward if there's a transition. And then a different question from a different person asked, will any of these recommendations have to go into the charter? And maybe they're just asking, what is allowed to be put into place by the city council versus what is having to go to a vote of the people.
Okay, sorry, I was more referring to the statement, I think, before that question about being
Oh, the statement, sure. The statement was just saying that, and this is a person putting in their comment in the chat, and I'm reading it exactly as they posted it, which is that council members tend to be ideologues who are paid by the power of their titles. Local volunteers are paid by the satisfaction of their accomplishments. And that is this person's opinion.
Okay, got it. I think, again, it is opinion, and I don't know that I agree with the opinion, but I do want to just reiterate that the last time I checked the city budget, the council members are paid something like $1,300 a year plus $50 a meeting. Someone please fact check me. The mayor is paid something like $3,600 a year. I'm saying 100, not 1,000, plus $50 a meeting. So the way that we have inequity at the ground level is that we don't pay our electeds like most cities do. And so then you have the retired folks and the people who are not most impacted by this work. I think it was Aisha or Melody who just said something about your third job. That's a very real thing. And, lots of talk with the schools right now, like someone else brought up, there is a huge inequity when it comes to any volunteer work, especially within the schools, especially what we ask of our parents. And I just want to, again, maybe the original poster disagrees with me, and which is totally fair, but I cannot stress to you enough how little we pay folks to do meaningful work, unless you're a law enforcement person here in town. So I think we really need to change the conversation about how we fund valuable systems of change, whether that's an entity or an individual. And I would just love it to keep this conversation going. I think it's a good point. Yeah, you don't get clout by being an Alameda City Council person, as far as I know. I can't speak for them. And I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
And I posted a link in the chat to the from the HR website page on the City Council compensation package, salaries and benefits. And that's, there's no more questions from the public, Al.
Okay. If I could just make a general comment about the work and the importance of the work that this committee has begun. Someone brought a blog post to my attention earlier this week where the writer was asking the question of whether or not we're creating a problem where no problem exists, whereas, and the suggestion seemed to be that perhaps we were just sort of caught up in the national moment and, looking at the problems that we see in Minneapolis or in Wisconsin or in Los Angeles and just applying this, throwing a blanket over APD and saying that there's the same problem. Interestingly, the blog post didn't address the incident that started this whole thing involving Mr. Molly Watkins. I thought that was strange, but I did appreciate the fact that the author was thinking about it. And in response to that, what I'd like to say is, you know, the reason that we're having this moment now, it's kind of an interesting thing. One thing I've heard repeated numerous times, you know, by national media figures is, you know, I've heard this referred to as an epidemic, but the fact is it's not new. What's new is camera phones. For years, people of color have been complaining about these things. They've been providing testimony about these things. They've made complaints to the police about these things. And in this country, they were not seen as having credibility, whereas police officers, as I indicated earlier, are seen as having supreme credibility. And so this is a situation that was ignored. Now it's not, because it's caught on camera. And I think if I'm not amazed at all at what I see. I'm sometimes amazed by the fact that you know, officers, knowing that they're on camera, still feel that it's okay to do these things. And I'm not talking about APD officers in particular. I'm talking about, you know, officers. I am talking about officers in general. But the fact is, you know, one of the reasons that we have the historic racism committee here, people might think that that's weird or might, you know, roll their eyes at that. But the fact is, historically, the reason that these situations have not been dealt with and have not been taken seriously is because the larger society tends not to believe what folks are saying, and they tend not to be educated on these situations. There was an interesting article that appeared, the Alameda Sun covered it. It was a 4-part article. It was also in the East Bay Times a couple of years ago. It was written by a local historian. And one of the things that he starts by saying is that, you know, in 1943, well, in 1940, the Black population in Alameda was 200 people. By 1945, it was 6,000. And in 1943, the mayor wrote a letter to the city manager saying, you know, we've got to do something about this this Negro problem, because the population who'd come mostly from the Southeast during the Great Migration was immediately seen, or within a couple of years, as being a problem. And that population, which was 6,000 in 1945, was reduced to less than 2,000 by 1970. And that happened because of you know, systematic measures that were taken by the Alameda government. Bus routes were eliminated. Mailboxes were taken away. And housing, you know, there was, because of the huge boom in housing, the housing that was available was government housing, and that housing was removed and demolished, so that the population had been reduced to less than a third of its maximum by 1970. I do not have statistics to show that policing was part of that intentional reduction, but based on my life experiences and the history that I've studied in other areas, I have a difficult time believing that it was not. Okay. What I do know is that when I talk to my friends of color and I say, and I invite them to come to Alameda, a city that I love, they often say, oh, I don't know about going to Alameda. I'm very nervous about the idea of going to Alameda, because the reputation that Alameda has is a reputation of over-policing people of color. People think if they come to Alameda, they will be stopped by the police. And historically, I think that is something that happened. In fact, when we were talking, you know, in the 3 meetings that I've referred to that we had with the APD leadership, Chief Finn, who grew up in the Bay Area, said when he grew up, he was aware of that reputation as well. It's not something that's just known among people of color. It's something that was widespread and I believe intentional. So, and many people have had the experience of being stopped by APD for, you know, swerving within a lane or for not signaling 100 feet from before a turn, or things like this. If you look at the number, APD, as I said earlier, keeps the statistics that is required to keep by the state, but it does not keep more. It does not currently have the crime analyst position, which Chief Finn advocated for. So there are not a lot of statistics, but one of the statistics that I think is pretty telling is the percentage of stops made on people of color, or Black people specifically, that result in a warning, okay, rather than a ticket being given. Now, there are 2 ways to look at that. One is the police officers are just especially nice to Black folks when they stop them, or they're stopping Black folks without a valid reason. Now, I don't know what the answer to that is, but my life experience tells me a certain thing. okay, or tells me that it at the very least requires further study, or that it may be an indication of a certain bias, especially when I combine this with the experiences of friends and loved ones. So that is why this is an issue that is addressed. We don't have the problems that larger cities have. We don't have incidences of horrific violence being committed against people of color by APD. But we have situations in which people of color are made to feel uncomfortable in our community. We have situations in which people of color, and these situations are frightening. Police officers talk about something that's called black and white fever. It's when you see that police officer behind you, all of a sudden you start driving worse. And it's an acknowledged phenomenon. And the reason that happens is because the police make us nervous, and oftentimes, particularly for people of color, the police are frightening. And interactions with the police can be frightening. Different people react differently to being frightened. Some people react, and as you get older, oftentimes you react with annoyance. I find it troubling when a 22-year-old police officer calls me by my first name, or calls me man, or calls me dude, rather than calling me sir. That's just a basic problem. And once you have that feeling of negativity or that feeling of anger or frustration, it's easy for situations to become elevated. And so that's a basic thing that needs to be addressed. In any case, I just wanted to address the fact that it seems that still, despite what we've seen in society and in Alameda, there are folks that believe that we are making this problem up. And I am a father of 2 children. I have a job that requires far more than 40 hours a week. I don't have the time to make these things up. I would love to spend my energy doing other things. Okay, so with that, all I'm asking is that folks, I find it strange that people believe that there's no value to me in making this up. I have a very full life. So I'm just asking that people take this seriously. And I am very open to criticism, and we need it. Projects are better when they are criticized. Projects are better when they are analyzed. I welcome that, but I think it's very important that we all start from the beginning, from the understanding that this is a problem that needs to be addressed in every community, and that we do the best that we can on it.
If I may just jump in, I saw there was another hand up really quick. Just to piggyback off what you were saying, Al, I just wanted to clarify one thing from the recommendation that was from our subcommittee at the end, number 8, I believe. And Andrea, feel free to jump in if I'm missing something. The storytelling piece that you mentioned, Al, is so critical to this work being successful. And I think, there's some folks or one folk in particular in the Facebook comments who would disagree with you that this is a problem. And I see he's brought his casual racism with him this morning. And but within the feedback tool, the city does currently have a process with which to do this online, but it is not comprehensive. It doesn't go anywhere. We've asked exhaustively and they kept coming back to us with different answers, but we've deduced that it doesn't really go anywhere. And this feedback is for ours being more comprehensive. It's good stuff, bad stuff, and lots of room for detail. In the current feedback tool, there's no civilian oversight, and we recommend an actual person be in charge, a person with some sort of training to see, like the underlying racism that will exist in someone's complaint, for example. And then that kind of piggybacks with the storytelling piece, which, if you stick around, you'll hear more from us when this piece is addressed, but we really do want to have a bigger audience to have discussions with, everyone from students to our elders in our community, to really kind of share their stories. So like you said, Al, no one's got time to make this up. And I think that part is extremely critical. So Andrea, if I've missed anything, go ahead and jump in. If not, I can be.
I would kind of like one of my committee members to speak briefly on this, Jennifer, please.
Thank you, Melody. So I want the folks in the public who are watching this to know that as the Oversight Committee, the Accountability Committee, as all of the task forces, and as Al Mance eloquently stated, we're doing this work for a reason. We're doing it because we care specifically about Alameda, and we were looking specifically at Alameda data. So the police has made a commitment to have their data analyzed by the Center for Police Accountability. But the Center for Police Accountability has looked at other police departments. The state of California has looked at larger police departments. And one of the key things they analyze is the relative risk of being stopped, of being arrested. And so they're comparing, at least on a first look, the data from your city to who makes up your city. And where Alameda collects data on race, there is a consistent pattern of over-policing of African Americans in the city. And that holds true for warnings and traffic stops. It holds true on arrests in general, and it most starkly holds true on arrests of our youth. And so anyone who looks at African American youth and see that they may be as high as 30% more likely to be arrested than other youth in the city, whether it ends up when analyzed more detailed to be at that magnitude speaks to a problem, and a problem that's specific to the city. And when that data is reinforced by the community conversations, the community stories that have been shared at city council meetings, at protests, at individual neighborhood conversations, it's time that we look at that data, we look at that problem and recognize it. And all of the task forces are proposing substantial ways of addressing that truth.
I just wanted to pick up on another thing that Al mentioned, this idea that we're making up, or we're kind of caught up in this national conversation, and we're missing that it's not a problem here in Alameda. Of course, there's Mr. Watkins, that incident, but if you go a couple years prior, there's an incident of a man with mental health issues who initiated a call with the police and eventually died from his encounter with the police. And you can look in the SF Chronicle and look at the settlement that Alameda paid to that person. So we have not only a history of interactions with the police that ended poorly, or the intimidation and stuff that Al talked about, but also on interactions with folks with mental illness or mental health problems or that sort of thing, people with disabilities, and those outcomes are demonstrably bad as well and have cost our city and the budget plenty of money. So again, to the idea that this is a manufactured problem, I'd encourage people to look at the history.
And to that, piggybacking off of that, yes, we're not making this. I'm 45 years old. I moved to Alameda 9 years ago for my job. And after having a lovely lunch on Park Street and enjoying my new city, I was called the N-word yelled randomly at me for the first time in my life. So please note, this may not be an issue for you. You may not know anybody directly impacted by it, but it is real. And this is, none of the work that we are doing is coming from a "we hate Alameda" place. It is quite the opposite. We love this city, and I won't speak for anybody, but I've not had a negative interaction with the police department. It doesn't mean that things are perfect, and it doesn't mean that things can't get fixed. And that is what this work is. That is what the hundreds of hours of work that we have been volunteering for the past 6 months has been going to. And again, you don't have to believe it, but you're not choosing to believe it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And that is what we are working to fix.
Yeah, if I may add, I would like to say that we're being challenged in this time to reimagine what public safety really means. And what does that mean? What does that look like? Who keeps us safe? There's so many amazing models out there that we can look at. nearby in the Bay Area, the state of California, and the nation. It's an exciting time, and the things that you love, the things that I love about Alameda, about raising my family here, we want to make it better. So when we can, you know, provide people with the services that they need in a more cost-effective way that, you know, has better outcomes, then we're all winning. So thank you for caring about this issue by tuning in.
I just wanted to add briefly that I think there's a history in Alameda of communities of color being both over-policed and underprotected. And anecdotally, through our subcommittee, we learned of some issues out at the Point, with Alameda Point Collaborative being underprotected when issues were raised, and they are also both over-policed. So I think there is a lot of evidence, actually, anecdotally and otherwise, that this is an issue for our community, and we all care about it, and we're showing that we care by participating and volunteering. And I also echo the thoughts of everybody about paying for where our values are in the future. So thanks everybody for tuning in.
Feels like a really great note to wrap up on.
Absolutely.
Yeah. If there are no more questions.
No more questions. And I've put the link to the survey in the chat for those listening on Facebook. It's alamedaca.gov/policing. Will take you to the main page. It has the recommendations, all 19 pages of them. And it also has a link to the survey, which you can get to directly at alamedaca.gov/policing survey.
Thank you all so much for joining us today. And if you have any other questions, you can join another community event that we listed. Thank you so much.
Or email.
Or email us.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Everyone, have a great Saturday.
Bye.
Hi, everybody.